started. Hello everybody and welcome to today's IEP Live Learn Lunch. We're very excited to be joined today by David from the Good Employability Company, who's going to be looking at how we can measure and instill quality. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand you over to David.
Good morning, afternoon, whatever it is, middle of the day to everybody. Thank you ever so much for coming. It's really flattering to me, and thank you to Helen for organising these lunches. You must never miss them. They're absolutely fantastic, regular in my diary. Lovely also to see some people back after the previous seminars that we've had. I'm kind of flattered beyond belief at that, and I hope that it's proving useful. Now, today I've got far too many slides and far too many things to say and far too many ideas for a really thoroughly interactive session. So I want to say to you, keep your fingers tapping away at the keyboard, talk to each other in the chat, ask questions in the chat, throw yourselves into this, because I think and hope that you're going to see some ideas. Some are familiar, but some are probably familiar in the sense that you think, oh my God, I do that, but unfamiliar in the sense that you think, I didn't know that I was doing that. So let's see how we go. Measuring and instilling quality. So instilling is getting it in your nature, not just going through a bolt-on process. Can I click that on? No. Helen, next slide, please. Here we go. First of all, there are lots of good things that have to do with quality, things like safeguarding and health and safety, but those are not the kind of quality that I'm talking about today. Today, I'm talking about good quality. That means results or outcomes, progress for clients, gains for clients, not doing any harm to anyone along the way, and making the right kind of ethical choices. So it's not about doing the necessary foundations of safeguarding and confidentiality and all that stuff, and it's not about assurance processes. It's actually asking ourselves, what is this stuff called quality? Next slide, please. Throughout this, there's a theme which is based on the evidence for quality. The first is that there are some things, I've called them necessary causes, which seem to lead to results. They appear causal as far as the evidence can tell us. Those necessary causes nearly always lead to a supportive relationship between the advisor and the client. And the relationship is supportive because it leads to purposeful, directed, goal-focused, call it what you want. I've called it purposeful progression for the client. So necessary causes, supportive relationships, and purposeful progression will pop up as quality things that we need to think of. Next slide, please. Those of you who were fortunate enough, shall I say, I'm allowed that, I think, to be at an earlier seminar, saw this slide. And in that earlier seminar, I talked about the evidence over the last 20 and 30 years for this diagram showing what the causes of quality are. And you can see that the arrows all point more or less from left to right. And there's a pinch point in the middle, which is the advisor's interpersonal skills. And there's a single outcome at the end, which is the client's capacity for choice and action. It doesn't say they get a job, because lots of clients don't get jobs, but they do get a benefit. So I'm not going to go into the evidence today. It's in a previous seminar on the IEP's wonderful YouTube website. It's there to look at, and all the references are there as well. So let's think about these necessary causes and, well, how do they lead to quality? Next slide, please, Helen. First of all, the organization needs to consider that set of causes and how they're realized in each organization. So do the managers and the leaders understand quality and commit to it? At the far right, are client capacities measured? Are advisors in the middle able to use their skills and to make professional choices? So there's an organizational level of quality that follows the same purposeful, the same necessary causes. Keep typing if you've got questions. Next slide, please, Helen. Now, the individual that's connected to your service also faces the same chain of causality. So on the left-hand side, the organization monitors what it's doing and it supports its people. It provides access to resources. On the right-hand side, your advisors are personally connected to the labour market and personally involved, and clients trust and work. So there's a level of quality that's about how the individual either implements or is affected by the necessary causes. Are you with me? I think so. Next slide, please. And there are external causes which are hugely significant, but often we treat them as things we can't do anything about. What kind of contract does your company have? What's the law on benefits and employment? What are your caseloads? Are the targets? These are called external causes, and they all influence what happens in the processes that we're looking at, and the causality and the resulting outcomes of the ability of the client to make choices. They all affect it. The evidence from studies around the world is very much at all of those levels. So please get your fingers moving, and brains too, if you like. Type in which of these helpful or unhelpful causes do you find present in your actual work. So anything you say is good, helpful, good stuff, things you find difficult, also great to see. And we'll press on because I'm going to push through loads and loads of slides today. Okay, I can't see anyone typing yet, but please do. Okay, next slide, please. Do you remember the second bubble in that early slide was about supportive relationships? And you can see that I've got 5 references from many more that you might want to follow up to ask, well, what does that word supportive actually mean? And I've tried to capture some of the things which it means in these little bubbles on the diagram. On the left-hand side, the organization provides resources and necessary networks. It provides flexibility in its service to adapt to each client. It provides discretion for advisors to do what they find necessary, and it provides them with some autonomy to make their judgments, which they will have to make, of course, with the client. Reasonable evidence about that, not the strongest in the world, but pretty good evidence that those things matter. The advisors, well, I'm sure that many of you, if you're advisors or have been, will recognize the list of interpersonal skills that I've put there. Anyone? Yes, please. Do say if you do, or indeed if you'd like to add. I don't think it's a comprehensive list, this one, and to be honest, it's just the ones which I could dig out and which came to mind when I was making this slide. So, but it shows that they all are doing and relating activities. On the right-hand side are the behaviors that we're looking for with clients. So we're expecting clients to persist, to have confidence, to decide, to intuit, to have mastery over their situation, and to be trusting because their advisor is trusting. So that's what a supportive relationship is, and that's how it fits into the chain of causality which lead to clients' choices and actions. Next slide, please, hon. Bingo. This is what happens at the high high intellectual level. There's very little intellectual on this slide at all. Supporting advisors leads advisors to be able to use their skillful behaviors, and they allow clients to develop autonomous action. And if anyone feels that I have made a moral or ethical judgment when I emphasize autonomous action, they are absolutely right. I have. I don't want my client acting like a machine to go and write 1 million CVs or 1 million applications just because I say so. I want them doing it because they think it is the right thing for them to do. And that's probably an inference from what is otherwise very good quality evidence that clients who do it because they want to and value what they're doing are much more likely to persist, to recover from failure and go on trying, and to be successful. So type in the box. Please do. I'm longing to see some feedback here. I run out of petrol, electricity. You run out of batteries if you don't give me feedback. What supportive relationships do you find present in your work?
Right. So while everyone's having an opportunity to type that, David, Julie earlier when we were looking at the other slide that all of those causes were evident, but not clear how much control or processes they have set up to manage those causes.
Absolutely. Julie, that's fantastic, because the whole question of quality is not just that you know that there's a cause there, but how do you use it to good effect? So you're quite right. And I hope I'm going to make that question both more difficult, but also a little less muddy, a little clearer in the second half of this, I hope. Jake likes the network with employers. Quite right. That's your connection to the local labour market, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And Dahlia is saying supportive relationships.
Yeah.
With cooperative relationships with the clients.
Yes.
Dahlia. Rachel says trust and confidence in the information and support we provide.
Yes, trust and confidence are shown up in the best evidence from around the world as really, really important active ingredients, factors that make a difference. Yeah. And the cooperative relationship that Dahlia's mentioned is also very much part of trust and confidence.
Excellent. Dahlia gets the gold star for saying training from the IEP as well. Thank you very much, Dahlia.
Yeah, take it.
I think training, wherever it is massive, isn't it? It makes such a difference to people.
Yeah.
Having the right training available for them at the right time.
Yeah, the chance to practice is really important. Trust and work with advisors and support and resources for advisors. Well, that's Julia. Thank you so much, Julie. Do you get enough support and resources? I'm sure some do and some less so.
Yes, and Amanda says creating a transparent and honest two-way relationship.
All right. This is definitely going somewhere, isn't it? We're getting an emphasis here on the, and I've prompted you, I admit it, I have. We're getting an emphasis on the advisor, and we'll come back to that. Let's look at the next slide.
One of the interesting things as we're moving on is sort of as we look at that two-way relationship, it's where it sort of differs, the advisor relation differs from advice and guidance, and when you think about advice and guidance, it sounds quite one way, but this advisor relationship, hopefully not.
Okay, purposeful progression. So the advisor is quite capable of having a trusting and lovely relationship with the client that goes precisely nowhere if you overdo the trust and the love and support and encouragement. We want to be purposeful. And the 4 things that the client needs to do is to choose an occupation. That sometimes gets left out. To find a job to apply for, then separate set of skills, compete for it, and once you've got it, another 4th set of skills is to keep it. And the right-hand end, I've copied in red down below, is the little network which makes that purposeful progression possible. So again, local labour market, adaptation to the circumstances, and the client's readiness to do those 4 things in the green boxes. Any comments about that? Does that seem oversimple? Anyone? I should think it is pretty simple. Let's look at the next slide while you type any comments you've got. Because actually it's very easy to get into unpurposeful progression if the support you give is not thoroughly structured. So here I'm introducing the idea that we need trust, confidence, openness, honesty, empathy, all those personal things, but we also need some structure. And if you're out of work, you get rejected. So you go and get a careers profile. So you do some more applications. And then you think, well, actually, that isn't working. I'll get a qualification and write a CV. And you get rejected. And you keep trying and you keep trying and you keep trying and you get fed up. And then you find yourself in a state of, mild, maybe severe depression. And you go on and on. That can easily happen, even with the very best advice. Well, perhaps not with the very best advice, but with good, humane advice that focuses on interpersonal skills. That can still happen. Let's look at the next slide. Purposeful progression is not a machine where you turn the handle. It is the use of the causal chain in a very focused way to explore the labour market, acquire the 4 skills of choose, find, compete, and keep, and think very carefully and act on the actual cultural circumstances. So if you're looking for a job in the City of London as a recently unemployed banker's assistant, is very different from looking for a job in Grange Villa the year after the coal mine shut. The social circumstances are actually hugely important, just as the local labour market are, and the skills to work in that labour market. What's Julie saying? Well,
so she's saying one of the hardest things is keeping clients focused to improve skills for work and not just applying for anything and everything.
Yes, isn't that right, Julia? Thank you for that. It's keeping clients focused on the skills they need, whether it's skills to apply and win a job or it's skills to use in the job. Focus on what's going to work for you, not just everything. So right, so right. Now, this looks like progression. Choose, find, compete, and keep. Question to you all. Does your work cover every aspect? Do you cover all 4? Or do you find yourself saying, oh, look, oh, great, new client, let's look for a job? Or have you started with choosing an occupation? If you look online at services for unemployed people, most of them start with compete for work. But you can't compete for work until you've found work. You can't find work unless you know what you're looking for. So that's purposeful progression. And please, I really like to read and see your comments in the chat box. That's really helpful. Thank you. Right. We're going to take a change of pace here into something which requires much more imagination and less logic. What does Amanda say quickly? Let's have that, Helen.
So Amanda says, choosing an occupation is quite difficult for some clients. They simply don't have any idea of what they want to do, and so often just say anything.
Quite right.
And it's a challenge, isn't it? Especially at a time like this where people are having to move from career to career because occupations just aren't there. Yeah. Deborah says, you also need to help them to realise what they have that others value. Yes, I've experienced this myself working with people, that they just don't see what you see in themselves. And that's massive, isn't it? To help them to see that they do have value and they have lots to offer. And he says the main focus is sustainable work, could do more on finding an occupation, as many don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are all really important, and they remind me of the time when I was more active as an advisor. To my shame and disappointment, I don't have time to do much of it at the moment. But remember that choices are constrained. Constrained choice is really important. If you live in a tiny little town and it has a pie factory at one end and a sausage factory at the other, your choice of occupation may well turn out to be between the pie factory and the sausage factory and not much else if you want to live in that town. So that question about what the local labour market offers or has in it is a really significant part of choosing, as well as the person's personal assets. Yeah.
Definitely. It's interesting, lots of comments now. Amanda says, often clients don't think they have any skills until we start talking. Ali says, there's definite value to giving clients the skills and ability, both short term and longer term, but we definitely challenge a client. We definitely challenge clients' motivation and confidence. Find it a challenge, I think that is, particularly after this year and increased uncertainty and anxiety. I think we all sort of relate to that, can't we? It's been the most incredible journey for us all.
Yes, quite right.
Yes, and I mean, just changing in the way we all work and that level of anxiety. Samina says, this is where upskilling them through training may help. If they want to change in career, the first step may be to do some training around this to see if it is the right decision for them. So maybe work experience or understand what that job role really is, rather than identifying it as an available job. Deborah says, as someone who used to manage work-related learning, organising work experience for 4,000 pupils a year, wow. There are not many occupation areas I have not visited to assess for health and safety. Conversations about how they can help students. Sometimes seeing something firsthand beats any form of LMI or labour market information. I would imagine it really does.
Oh, for sure. No, labour market information, if by that you mean the kind of statistics you get out from the companies that provide it, tell you almost nothing compared to going and looking. You've got to go and look.
It's like job descriptions are never what people experience. Sometimes how many people have read a job description for their own job and thought that is nothing like what I actually do? That is not my experience. So yeah, definitely.
Great works of fiction, yes.
Yes. Ali said, yeah, it was definitely seeing challenge of client motivation and confidence. Thank you, Ali, for that. And Dahlia says it's also a challenge to support people to see that they can make a job work for them and get it to fit into their career narrative.
Quite right. So people need to be reminded that actually they're human beings and they're flexible. And, you know, we don't all fit every part of our job perfectly. Another theme we'll come back to. Let's go on to the next slide, because I can see Rachel, many programs seem to drop off in support once the individual finds work. They do. Yeah. Yes. Right. So change of direction slightly. I've been talking about causes and how they might be realized. Now, what are we going to measure? You can't tell its quality unless you measure it. I know my car is reasonably economical because I don't have to fill it up very often. I actually measure how much petrol I put in it in pounds, and I realize it uses less than my last car, so I'm comparing it. I'm doing a measurement. But what are we going to measure? Right, let's think. We could measure how much do people need our help. Trouble with that, it's a great idea, but it's terribly difficult to do accurately. And there are different systems, different ways of thinking about it, hard to do. Right, we won't do that then. We'll measure, do we meet goals? Has somebody got a job? Well, if they haven't got a job, have they gone towards a job? Have they made an informed choice? They're all goals, and they're all, you know, decent, honourable, let's go for them type goals. All right, let's measure how much quality we put in and whether it gives us the outputs. Are we behaving the right way? Yes, we are. Is it producing the goals? How do we know? Maybe it's not what we do. Maybe it's something else. Maybe the labour market's changed. Oh, it's difficult, isn't it? Okay, fine. One of my favourites. Let's measure social impact, equality of outcomes. If we can make a guess at who needs our help most, can we do something which means that they get just as much positive results as the people who don't need our help? Whew. Okay, logically it makes sense, morally it makes sense. You try doing it. It can be done, but it's really pretty difficult. So we go back to, we can measure individual impact, and we can do it by asking clients. Have you made a choice for an occupation? Yes, I have. I want to be a road sweeper. Great. Let's move on. Have you got the job search skills? Yes, look how I do my interview. It's fabulous. Are you confident? Are you active? Yeah, those are all right. But our own confidence about their impact long-term on outputs, goals, social situations is, the causality feels a bit weak sometimes. And then if you're going to measure any of those things, you shouldn't just measure them. You should say, better compared to what? And that takes a bit of thinking through, because it's no good saying all of my clients are terribly well motivated if compared to the next door clients, they're not very well motivated. It's no good saying we got 50% into jobs if the next door clients got 75% into jobs. That's a technical problem, not a moral or measurement problem, and it can be overcome, but it needs some thinking about. The last one on my list is client satisfaction. Please follow up the reference at 13. It makes me hoot with laughter every time I read it, so I'm not going to tell you about it. My question for you is, do you count your successes, or do you compare them with other or outside influences and sources of information? Do you count or do you compare? Let's look at the next slide while you answer that question. Another change of direction. We all use, without exception, metaphors, or some people call them models, to describe our work. And the models we choose to use, and we'll look at some models in a moment, so don't for the moment worry too much about what does he mean by models. The metaphors we use define quality, and they decide what we measure. So if I think that the way a crow flies is a suitable metaphor for going to work, I would define quality as, do my people get straight into work without any hesitation? And I would measure it. I'd try and find some measure which said straight into, probably meant quickly, but anyway. There's a really nice long remark from Deborah. Deborah, would you want to take us through that, Helen?
Yeah, definitely. So Deborah says, I sometimes use the analogy of snakes and ladders, and that helping someone to move forward is not linear. As long as you are on the board, you have a chance of reaching a. We look at success as being in a better place than yesterday and having a greater chance of success tomorrow.
Deborah, that's brilliant. It's 100% true, and I can't imagine any of us disagreeing. And also, you are about to see the metaphor that you're using. Though I think the snakes and ladders metaphor is a really good and interesting one. Let's look at the next slide. Boing. Here are, it took me about 15 minutes to find these metaphors, and they all come from return to work services on the internet. And don't you like this one down at the bottom? With the right support and some scaffolding around them, young people can accomplish anything. Have you any idea what scaffolding means to a young person who's trying to, I mean, what? It's really difficult to know what that means, except intuitively, it's got a right feel to it, hasn't it? And that's what metaphors do. Look up on the top left, a wraparound package of support. In my head, I've got brown paper and string and sellotape, but I know that's not what's meant. I'm not quite sure what is meant. So I'd like you to think up your own favorite metaphor, and you can put it in the chat, because the technology won't allow you to put it in the picture frame on the right of this.
Well, it could, because of annotation, but there's no room, and that's absolutely fine. So we'll look for them in chat. Going back to our question earlier about, while people are popping those in into chat, whether we count or compare successes, we've had several answers. So Jake says compare. Rachel says honestly, ellipsis, count. Dahlia says we count. Julie says count, who we work with and how we do it. Not comparable to other projects.
Yeah. Okay.
We count, then compare the numbers. And then there were a few people who really liked Deborah's analogy of snakes and ladders. I think a few of us are going to be using that going forward, but we will people know it was Deborah that shared it with us, I'm sure. Deborah says, with young people, we could be a hoodie that keeps them warm and dry. There you go. There's a metaphor for you, David.
Yeah, that's a nice one, isn't it?
Hoodie that keeps you warm and dry. Ali says around them in comments, sounds confining or restricting, like young people can achieve anything within the limits we want them to stay in. Doesn't sound very inspiring to me.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So what you get from a metaphor isn't always what the metaphor wants you to get. Exactly.
So Carol says, the world is your oyster and I am the shell helping you to achieve.
Oh, oyster's really hard to open too.
Yeah.
While you're do go on typing those. We won't read them all out because I've got so many slides to show you. Oh, okay, we've gone straight ahead now.
Oh, sorry, was we not supposed to?
I was going to ask you before we go to the next slide, to envisage a journey, because we often talk about the journey to work, and we don't mean the bus and driving the car to work. We mean going from unemployment through getting some training, whatever it is, to getting a job. Think about a journey. What image comes to mind? Think of a single word. It might be aeroplane, it might be railway train, it might be foot slog, it might be anything you want, and type it in chat. Let's see how fast you can be. I just want to see a couple of those. Fingers. Train. Good. Train. There we are. Rachel takes the train. Dahlia gets blisters. Yeah. Track. Deborah. Pathway. Connections. Yeah. We've all got images, haven't we, that pop up when we talk about the journey to work. Keep them coming. And we'll look at the next slide while they keep coming. Photograph is of some people starting on the journey to work. Their journey starts in Syria and will end in London 3 years later. So it's a metaphor. It isn't reality. Really important throughout this next stage of the discussion that we realize that our metaphor is a way of thinking. We can't escape from it. It is helpful, but it's not reality. If we use the journey to work metaphor, we focus on progression. We don't focus so much on causes. And sometimes we forget about some of the things like supportive relationships, but not always. And we run the risk that we assume that our map of the journey is the one that suits our client. We run the risk that the goal the client has is escape from where they are, not arrival where we want them to be. So the metaphor is both incredibly helpful and also divisive. It can divide us from the client's reality. Okay, that's just the way it is. And as an aside, a lot of people feel that measuring progress to work is very difficult to do. I've given you 3 references which tell you ways in which you can measure progress. Next slide, please. Well, now this is how the boss sees it. We've got to have a process. It needs all the right resources. If we put the right stuff in at the beginning and get enough money to run it, we'll get the causes right, progression will follow, and pop out will come a Ford Model T. Not a Ford Model T at all, an employed person at the end. So it makes measurement of hard inputs and outputs and measurement of processes, if not easy, at least doable. But it risks leaving out some of the human content which people have talked about before. And you can usually tell when somebody's got the manufacturing metaphor in their head because they say, our people are our greatest asset. And as I say, Google it. You'll break the internet. This metaphor or model produces things like targets and incentives, benefits, sanctions, action planning, better off calculations, specialist supply chains, force field analysis. I imagine you mostly know about that. It was fashionable once, it's less so at the moment. These are all based on the idea that the people in the system are rational and will do the things that maximize their benefits if you give them the correct inputs and influences. I'm hoping that I might be provoking some angry responses. Maybe not, maybe support. Let's go to the next slide. The medical treatment model, terribly common, especially it's common if there's any kind of insurance or disability or indeed medical interventions. Or anyway, the model is that the professional will evaluate the problem and provide you with some treatment objectives. And believe me, this is not going to hurt a bit. We're just going to take a look up there. It's diagnosis, intervention and cure. And it's unreliable in our field because the diagnosis doesn't always work very well. It puts the expert in control and it assumes that there is a single optimum intervention. And it risks ignoring the labour market. So the model which says we're going to treat your condition has got lots of risks with it. But on the other hand, it is really, really good model if what you want to do is work out how to measure what you do compared to what other people do, or compared to not doing anything at all. And it's great for understanding why things went wrong or when they went wrong. So the measurement techniques from medicine are immensely useful. Okay. Next slide, please. The marriage broker. Yeah, also known to some people as the careers advisor, or generally the person who thinks they know or can find out what the essence of the client is, or their personal traits, and they can also find out the essence of a job, and all you have to do is match them up, and hey presto, what could be easier? Trouble with this is it's actually not justified by results. And we've talked about this in earlier seminars. The matching of people to jobs turns out to be extremely variable, rather random, not very motivating, difficult. And it may lead people to believe, may lead your clients to believe that they've been given something really valuable, some really, really valuable advice that they should follow, when actually the advice is pretty dodgy, not the best they've ever had. And that in a way forces them to a course of action that might not be right or carries high risks. That replaces client choice with advisor or machine choice. There's an awful lot of it about. Again, if you want to really get depressed, go online and do online careers guidance. It's just you need a strong sense of humor to survive an hour or two doing that. But you can control the process. So if you're being managed by someone who's got the manufacturing metaphor, the marriage broker metaphor will work well for an advisor who's under pressure from targets, because they can control the process. Do you know what? This quality stuff is not straightforward, is it? I thought we just needed a ruler. No, apparently not. Any thoughts at this point from anyone?
We have some comments that have come in. Dahlia says the assumption that outcomes can be produced within the minimum possible investment is also a challenge.
Yeah, that's the manufacturing analogy, isn't it?
And Deborah says, do we not think the industry sometimes uses language and comparisons to justify their processes and really removes the person from the process?
Yes, we do. And again, that's the rational actor who behaves like a machine. If you motivate them, they'll do what you want.
Yeah, and Dahlia responded to that saying, yes, Deborah, clever advertising. What do the clients think and what was their experience? Perfect.
So we'll segue briefly into the next slide on that note. Yes. Oh, I thought I was going to another one. This is perfect then. So this is where I think probably most of the people that are here today would sign up for this metaphor. And it's my favorite, I've got to admit it. And there's a lot of evidence that it's important. This is the metaphor of a skilled craft. If advisors are skillful, experienced, trained, and human, they can create that supportive relationship, and they can put meaning into phrases like, with the right scaffolding around them, young people can do anything. So it's great for providing personal support. It's great for getting to know the labour market locally. It's great for understanding the social setting. Some people think it's hard to measure. I disagree. I think skills are behaviours, and provided you know what you're looking for, you can see them. But outcomes and linking outcomes to those skills is a bit more difficult. If this is all we do, we risk forgetting about the causal chain and getting so engrossed in our clients we forget about progression. And of course, this is where a lot of the cost comes in. So the skilled craft metaphor is at the heart of lots of what we do. It's really important, but it's got its risks just like any other. Deborah is saying, quality for whom? the provider to justify their funding, the customers smile and joy, the DWP to justify their approach. All of the above, preferably with something valuable for the person included. And there's a quote down at the bottom of your screen which describes the skilled craft metaphor. Next slide, please. Could we determine quality by asking consumers what they thought of it? Well, we could, and it's a valuable input. And if people give you their honest opinions, that's definitely worth listening to. That approach focuses on progression and supportive relationships because the consumer doesn't really, usually anyway, doesn't know about the machinery that, sorry, I'm back to the manufacturing metaphor. The consumer doesn't know about the machinery that led to the supportive relationship and any progress that they made. They're not subject experts. And satisfaction really is dependent on so many different things. This is a tough one to measure and to get anything other than a kind of Trustpilot feedback. Feedback tends to be strongly biased, usually on the critical side. And measurement needs to be really skillful. Now, I've just described in the blurb beforehand, I said 4 models. Actually, it's turned out after a bit of thinking and finding nice pictures on the internet, it's turned out to be 6 models. They're all metaphors for what we do. They all have an impact on quality. They all direct our thinking and our efforts in one direction or another. They all have weaknesses and they all have strengths. And I don't think it's possible to think about our business without using some kind of metaphor, or at least it's a difficult intellectual exercise. Let's look at the next slide. Any more metaphors that you can think of that your organization uses, please put them in the chat box now. Please, that would be great. Quality is something which happens probably when all of these metaphors are working cooperatively together. It's instilled, it's part of your thinking, your language, your behavior, your relationships. Getting that to happen probably requires an installation process, which is not only the procedures of gathering data, but it's also the staff training and the resources and the client involvement and the feedback mechanisms that you use. We need to use all of the models. And please, can we add to my list the snakes and ladders model? I like that one. That's got to be in there as well. We need to think like that. Don't run away from your metaphors, but be critical of them. Know their limits. Once you know the limits, you can stop yourself being trapped into partial quality. You can use another metaphor that might be more relevant. When you start measuring things, you're going to change people's behavior. If you give advisors targets, and next thing you do is you measure the targets and bingo, advisors' behavior changes. If you want to see whether advisors are using the right skills, you might want to go and watch them use it and have a tick box saying, oh, you're doing really well there. I saw you giving some superb feedback, 10 out of 10 for that. That will change their behavior. So measurement has got to be done with a lot of thought, a lot of practice, a lot of trial runs. Measurement has costs. It affects the people, it affects the results, and it affects the finance. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Of course you should do it, but it also means you might want to think about using a counterfactual, as measuring what happens if you don't do anything, if you don't help the client. That can be done ethically. Then there are ways around the obvious moral problem there. You need to think about spending some of your money on checking what would happen by comparison with doing nothing, or by comparison with what you used to do. Okay, so measurement is important. Instilling quality is what leads to quality, but you have to install it first. You have to get it fixed into the organization until everybody from the chief executive down to, did I say down? I should have said up to the client, understands the metaphors that are being used, why they're being used, what effect they have on practice, and whether or not they're helping you work. And there's some superb, we've just got time to look at some really nice remarks there in the chat box.
Okay, so Deborah said, I have a theory about words and generalizations, and that sometimes they can be used to hide behind. So a large vocabulary helps to debunk myths, breaks down preconceptions, and gets the best for those you are helping.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. I would do, especially after what I've just been saying. I'd have to, wouldn't I? But I'm sure it's completely right. You know, it is completely right, Deborah. And a large vocabulary also means using a vocabulary that's appropriate to the people you're communicating with, doesn't it? Because we're all using those metaphors.
Yeah. Kate asks, is everything we're discussing here intrinsically linked to organizations' culture, do you think?
Anyone else can answer that in the chat box too. Kate, I don't think I can answer that question because I don't know what organizational culture means. I know what it means when the organization imposes targets on its staff. It means that they're using the manufacturing metaphor to control processes and performance. Now, if you call that culture, yes, it's intrinsically linked. Yes, it has to be. But if you call that believing in a certain kind of cause and effect, I think you can start to unpick it and say, well, why do we think that cause and effect is the one that works? And is it the one that works? And how would we measure whether it works or not? So yes, it is culture. In a way, you have to say, yes, of course it is. But let's unpick that. Let's take the stitching out.
So we've had some other responses in the chat on that question. Deborah says, yes, culture and organisation often get fixated on what is, what was, and forget that in employability, we need to be working on or working with what is about to be.
Yeah.
And yes, Kate, it's an organisation has a great value statement. It needs to influence everything, or else it's just words. Then she corrected it to if, which I saw after I'd read it out. So sorry about that, Dahlia. Yes. And we had another comment from Deborah said, Radio 4 had a good programme on auditors/audits that fail and how much can be learned by how they manage to get away with charging so much for so little, so long. Could be related to very many industries and how many processes, complex processes hides poor performance.
Yeah.
Food for thought there. Kate, the organisational culture can be a powerful thing, and I believe it is.
It is. It is. Very much so. As I know to my cost. I'm going to move on to the next slide just for a moment and leave it up there just for a few seconds so that it is recorded on the YouTube video. That means when you go to look at the YouTube video, you can have a few moments to look at these and you can pause it. And those of you who like reading stuff, I hope there are plenty among you might find some of this interesting. I think. But with just a couple of moments to go to answer more questions, hear more contributions, let's look then at our final slide. Because I'd really encourage you to tell me what anything else or what more or detail or other topics you'd like to discuss. It's a huge privilege and pleasure for me to work with Helen on putting these together and talking to you. I can't tell you what a boost it gives to my life, self-esteem, fun, call it what you will. I love it. So if there's anything else or any contributions or anyone that thinks, oh, I could do that, I'm definitely here to help.
Wonderful. So yes, do. One of the things that you can do in order to do that, you can either email David direct, as you can see his email on the screen, or you can contact myself. And it links quite nicely into something I was going to mention during the wrap up anyway, which is the IEP Digital Technology Conference, which is coming in September. I'm really going to encourage you all to enroll for as much or as many of the sessions as you can. They will all be recorded and shared post-event. But throughout that, we will be using an event platform, and you will be able to join in, and there will be discussion forums where you can share these ideas and share ideas with other people as well. So if you haven't already had a look at the IEP website and found the link to go to Eventbrite to register for that, I will be sharing it with everyone, and please do come and join us for that. David will be in attendance, no doubt.
No doubt.
Yeah, brilliant. And there'll be lots more information coming up on that. That we're running it. It's taking place over a week. There'll be activities and speakers every single day from Monday to Friday, starting on the 20th of September. We're getting lots of thank you, Davids, from everyone for being here. Fantastic. We always enjoy having you here, as I've said, David. Deborah says, how about reinventing the wheel, looking at why every program is presented as new, when in reality, that's a really good...
Isn't that a great
really
topic?
good session.
Wow, we should do something on that. Deborah,
Definitely.
you're leading that one.
Definitely. Well, maybe we should get Deborah to come and be involved.
Yeah.
In it, shouldn't we? But yes, brilliant. A great suggestion. Lots more. Roger, Carol, Amanda, Rachel, Andrea, all saying thank you for the session. Julie saying, Julie's saying it was a great session. It was your first, but you will be back. That's great to hear.
Welcome, Julie.
Contributions as well. So please do come back. It's always great to have people that come back week after week. And Samina says thank you both as well. I'm just aware of it's everyone's lunch times, and I need to let you go back to your jobs before we all me and David get in trouble with your employers. So just to let you know what's happening.
Back to the production line.
Exactly, David, exactly. Just to let you all know what's happening next week. We have R&IB joining us, and they're going to be looking at in-work support for people with sight impairment. So that's a great one. And the following week, on the 18th of August, we have Mesmer joining us, and they're going to be looking at making organisational self-evaluation and improvement planning work. Something a little bit different there. And the following week, on the 25th of August, we have Meraki Consult joining us again, and they will be looking at quality assurance and all sorts of aspects. So kind of on a theme with what we've been looking at today, but looking at it from the process side of things. So yeah, wonderful to have you all here today. Thank you all for staying for that hour and over the hour. Some of you have. We really look forward to seeing you on a future session, and we will get David back to join us for some more. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your days and your weeks. I won't be here next week. I'm having a week off. I'm on holiday.
Yay.
So I know, how exciting. So I will be having my colleague Emma will be taking the LiveLearnLunch with R&IB, Andy Swan next week, and I'll join you back the following week. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for coming.
Okay, thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.